Alright guys, strap in, it's going to be a long one. I'm here today to talk a little bit about news, all the current happenings and things going on with Guild Wars, which of course includes the big lore AFC. So if you guys are totally out of the loop, a while ago the devs announced a new initiative to essentially host community interaction moments on the forums, similar to how they do the Reddit Ask Me Anythings after a big release. So Episode 2 was a while ago now. Episode 3 will be a while in the future. We're kind of in that dead period in the middle, and they're filling that out with the AFC on lore this time. So people were able to go to the Guild Wars 2 official forums and get lots of juicy tidbits and discussion from the devs about that. Kind of an interesting concept, doing a lore AFC to me, something I actually am almost against, because I strongly believe that story should exist within the games. I don't like this idea that the more they teach us outside of the games, you end up having weird lore speculation and discussion constantly tarnished by referencing old developer quotes and interviews from years past. So I don't know how an AFC really sits with me. I don't know how great the answers we can get out of it, but you guys will see what the devs said. I do think there were some really worthwhile responses and clarity offered on aspects of Guild Wars and Tyria that I don't think we would have got in any other place. So it is genuinely well worth a listen to, and that's going to be the bulk of this video. However, I do want to fill you in with just a couple of other things that are going on too. You will see videos on some of this. First of all, current events. So I still haven't actually shown you the not most recent current events, but the one before that dealt with Joko's invasions. If you guys remember, in episode 1 of season 4, they do establish that Palawa Joko is sending Awakened all over the place to actually assault core Tyria. And there were current events to do with that. Well, just this week, there was an update to that includes new attacks landing on South Sun Cove, new interactable objects, new achievement points that you can go for, new achievement, and new dialogue too with the Asura that appeared in our home instances. Now, if you're scratching your head thinking, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, WP, don't worry, I will cover that current event just like I've covered all the other ones. Now that it's a little bit meatier, we can get a good video out of it. I might even bring Boots along. But yeah, if you guys want to jump in and play that already before I do my video, I just want to let you know it is live and it's reasonably fun. Next, another bit of news that everybody's thinking about is World vs. World side. So you guys know that generally speaking, we're all desperately anticipating the arrival of an announced alliance feature. The devs talked about this, was it a blog post, I think? Big changes coming up in the way that worlds and servers are handled, in the way that people group up, in the way that we view matchups, everything. Really, really big core change to World vs. World that a lot of people are very on board with. We last heard about that, what, 2 months ago? 3 months now? And the devs made it very clear back then that they were in the early preemptive stages. They wanted to sort of fish for feedback, see if the community was on board with it before they went any further. I think they got the feedback that yes, the community is in general, just with some minor tweaks. And now they've been away working on it. So you might not know this, but over on the Guild Wars 2 Twitch, they do weekly Let's Play streams of World vs. World content, where you get to see World vs. World devs playing World vs. World. I haven't really tuned in on any of those streams. I haven't seen how they are. I don't know how illuminating they are. But it was on one of those streams just this week that we heard about the overhaul again. A dev offhandedly mentioned that it's a long ways off. Yeah, so not great news, but here, watch it yourself. This is the moment.
We are working on the alliance system presently.
It's still a ways.
It's still a ways off.
We built it by playing WoWla. We're doing it as we speak.
What Nick said is not true.
And yeah, I guess I'll watch the World vs. World weeklies to see if we get more insights coming up. So there you go. Obviously, I think this is to be expected. That's not going to be exciting, especially to World vs. World mains and people like me who are looking for a reason to get back into World vs. World. But there you have it. Next as well, staying with the streams, it is the 13th anniversary of Guild Wars 1 at the moment, would you know? Obviously, the Guild Wars 2 anniversary is in August, but it was at the end of April that Guild Wars Prophecies first released way back in 2005. It's the 13th anniversary. That's obviously not a big or exciting or interesting anniversary. So I wasn't expecting anything at all. I don't think we saw anything on like the 11th, for example. We obviously did with the 10th. But the devs did do something. They had another stream, so what you're looking at in the background there is a 2018, just a week oldish stream from Guild Wars 2 devs going back and playing the original game. I love seeing the original game get some love, and there were even some interesting insights. So the two devs were Elizabeth Cardi and Joe Kims. I'm not sure what Elizabeth's capacity was with Guild Wars 1, but she did describe it as like one of her favorite games ever, had some cool anecdotes. Joe, though, was actually responsible for some development or something at the time and had a lot of interesting little quips. So here I'll just condense the hour stream for you if you don't want to watch them playing. First of all, apparently all the Cornins from Ilona in Nightfall during development, they hadn't actually created the Cornin models yet, so they all appeared for gameplay testing purposes and spawn management and whatnot. They just appeared as White Mantle. So during development, apparently Ilona was just flooded with White Mantle soldiers. That was kind of interesting to hear. We heard that it was difficult for them to give Heket pets. So Heket are kind of the Ilonan variety of Hylek. I'm actually surprised that Path of Fire hasn't touched on that species whatsoever yet. Hopefully when we get to Corner they'll do something. That'd be a cool little tie between Heart of Thorns and POF as well, I guess. But yeah, we heard about that being difficult. We heard about the fact that when Paragon was being introduced and Spears were being introduced to Guild Wars 1, they all originally had placeholder icons of shields. So for a good period of time, apparently a ton of the skills in the game were just throwing shields around. I guess we get a bit of that flavor in Guild Wars 2 as engineers, but something about that I really kind of enjoy. And yeah, there was just kind of an interesting stream. They got trolled a few times, like people popped concepts, spent a lot of money, and then because they were playing with the community, random members of the community, these outposts were filled up with people excited to play with the devs. And when they actually got out into the explorable map, somebody kept zone trolling, which is something Guild Wars 2 players will have no concept of, but was kind of funny to see, I have to admit. Side note, obviously, this wasn't to do with the 13th anniversary, but do you remember that tiny little command line argument flag that SCW enabled for Guild Wars 1, making the graphics a tiny bit better? Yeah, you remember that? You remember I did a small, inconsequential video on that? That has now got over 100,000 views. Tons of people seem interested in looking back at Guild Wars 1, and it seems like the tiniest little morsels of information or attention that the devs get it. There's like this huge captive audience waiting to grab onto it. I couldn't believe that. That's one of my most successful, most viewed videos in like a while. That like rivals Path of Fire coverage. And it was just for a tiny little command line argument. So thanks to everyone who watched that, and I guess that shows that there's still a lot of love out there for the original game. If only the devs just put a couple of people on it to just throw out random nonsense, skill balance and things. How cool would that be? There you go. Some other tiny bits of news. New initiatives come to Guild Wars 2. Speaking along Guild Wars 1 style stuff. Weekend events appear to be a thing that the devs are playing with. So we had a weekend event right when they added glyphs to the game and the new gathering tools update. If you guys missed that, I already have a video on that. They added a weekend event that gave you extra bonuses to gathering and double experience in PvE and World vs. World. The World vs. World experience going on your World vs. World rank, obviously. So they did that. That was kind of nice. And as I believe, more have been data mined, including a big World vs. World one coming, where there's not going to be any downstate and there'll be extra bonuses there. I really like the idea of weekend events. I think they worked very well for Guild Wars 1, and I think that they could do perfect things to incentivize gameplay in various areas of the game in Guild Wars 2. The specifics of the way they handle World vs. World ones obviously is going to be controversial, because World vs. World players are very, very specific about what they want to see go in the game. A lot of them won't like the idea that lots of PvE players looking for rewards come to the game type. But as always, I say anything that boosts the population for that side of the game, and you get a bit of trickle down, some people stay in World vs. World even after the weekend event's over, that can only be a good thing. And then lastly, the Gem Store had an update. I usually wouldn't mention this, however, it was again a Guild Wars 1-ish looking thing. They added the Guild Wars 1 Dervish, I think it's Primeval armor, as an outfit, and you can straight up look like a Dervish in Guild Wars 2 now. They also added another Scythe skin. So there were already several of these. There was like a Destroyer staff, there was the Halloween staff, there was Final Rest from the Shadow Behemoth. Well, now they've got this one too, and it's beautiful. It's the Sun Touch Scythe, I think. It's got special animations as you spin it around. That's probably what you're looking at me playing as in the background there. So there you go. That's a selection of news and things that are going on for the first 10 minutes of the video. Let's jump into the lore AFC now, though. And yeah, we're going to be pretty deep with pure story discussion from the devs now, guys, covering a wide range of stuff. From Guild Wars 1 Utopia, which, yeah, we talked about because of a recent Guild Wars 2 mysteries, seems to have made its way onto the AFC, good job, guys, to the novels, to Season 1 stuff, Season 2 stuff, and even what might be coming up in the future. They do have some pretty good hints, so let's jump in. The opening message read from Gail on April 25th. She says, "Hello and welcome. We're very happy to join you today to discuss Guild Wars and Guild Wars 2 lore. This is a topic near and dear to many Guild Wars players, just as we hold it very close to our hearts too. We've brought together a fun and lively group of devs to answer your questions, read your feedback and suggestions, and ponder the mysteries of Tyria with you." These are always fun moments for me because it reminds me very clearly how story-heavy and oriented so many of their employees are, and so much focus of this game is these days. It never used to feel like this, guys. It's kind of amazing to see how slowly that has changed, and is obviously incredible for a lore enthusiast such as myself. So who have we got? We got Tom Abernathy, the narrative director, the new hire we talked about on a recent video. Andrew Gray, the Guild Wars 2 Living World team lead. I'm not sure when he took that post. I can't remember if that's been a long time or not. Scott McGough, the story editor. You've seen I had an interview with him when Path of Fire was coming out. Lindsay Murdoch, Guild Wars 2 lead designer. Always has amazing stuff to say about Living World in particular. Jessica Price has very much impressed me with her responses in Reddit AMAs and such when new Living World episodes come out. And the tried and true, always got something good to say, Bobby Stein, whose title here is Associate Narrative Director. So join in and have fun. Just to be clear, by the time you're watching this video, it's closed. You can't offer any more questions. There might be more dev responses, clarifying things further. Devs can still post, but players can't. I've actually waited several days after the closing to make sure that I can catch any straggling information as well, because I wanted to be very comprehensive with this video. So let's start off, first of all, with a post from Underdark, who's talking about Heart of Thorns and a Heart of Thorns spoiler to do with Air. Basically just says, how and why did you decide that Air had to die in Heart of Thorns? Were there any other characters that you had planned to kill off in her place? So, personally, not the most interesting question, I would say. I'm pretty much done with the Air thing. I do remember it being a little bit controversial in some people's minds as it came out. But Scott McGough has a really, really good response here, actually. So, he says, "We debated long and hard about how we would portray the impact of Morgemoth's war against the Pact, and who, if any, of our main characters would die. During these discussions, literally no one was safe. We discussed the pros and cons of everyone's death, individually, in small groups, or the whole enchilada. Interest in the character and the character's popularity, both inside and outside ArenaNet, was a consideration. But in the end, the deciding factor was always, what impact does this death have on the story we're trying to tell, the characters who survive, and any plans we had for the deceased character's future arc? In other words, if we had clear plans for the character that would be featured in the main plotline going forward, the character was more likely to survive Heart of Thorns." So let me just stop there. This is already really interesting. Number one, I think it's good. It shows that they're not killing, essentially in a roundabout way. Scott's saying, we're not going to kill someone just for shock value. We're thinking about how that spirals out on the world later. And obviously that's the way you should handle character deaths. It's always about how that impacts everyone else going forwards. I do find it curious that they didn't have any plans for Air. Because if you look back at the the dungeon story in general, and obviously how the core game culminates, it really felt like there was a lot going on. And in fact, Scott will touch on that in a second. So I guess we'll keep going. He says, some decisions were pretty easy. We knew early on that we wouldn't bring Ritlock back as a Revenant and then immediately kill him off. Kanak was in the middle of a redemption arc, and we didn't want to cut that short. We had inklings Logan would step up to take over the Pact Marshalship after Traherne died, so we wanted to leave that door open, etc, etc. That's cool, by the way. We only, as a community, very recently got to that point in the story, or it feels like in my mind, it's towards the end of the Season 3, right, that we hear about Logan stepping up for the Pact, but they had that in mind in Heart of Thorns concepting. They decided that Traherne was going to die, and they already had an idea that Logan would step up. I think that's fascinating, especially, again, Logan, if you look at the whole thing, oh, is he dead, is he not dead, right at the end of the core story, they kind of had to keep doing things with him, I think, so it would have felt really weird to kill him in Heart of Thorns. That basically made him safe in my mind. We eventually decided that we did want to raise the stakes and lose one of our main characters. Otherwise, the war against Morgemoth would feel like it was only dangerous for generic NPCs. And we settled on Air from Destiny's Edge because of the story we set out to tell her about Guild Wars 2's launch was complete. Throughout Guild Wars 2, she was still grieving over Snath's death, for which she took all the responsibility, as she was the leader of that failed mission, and the subsequent dissolution of Destiny's Edge. She had a bit of a death wish, fatalistic view of her future. See the Honor of the Waves dungeon story path. Honor of the Waves, by the way, guys, is really dark. It genuinely is. She's basically just going there to kill herself. It's kind of nuts. And during the Nornport personal story, she expressed how she wanted to find the next great hero to lead her people to glory against the Elder Dragon, since she had failed to. Again, grieving and fatalistic. She found that hero in you, the Norn player character. I think that last point that she found it in the Norn player character is kind of amazing, actually, because she easily could have been her own redemption arc to have fallen away and then rose to become a prominent leader again, but instead we put that on the player. That is not to say there weren't more Air stories we could have told in the future, or we were out of ideas for her, but rather we felt her story arc was pretty complete as it was, and as Heart of Thorns was also meant to demonstrate a changing of the guard, from Destiny's Edge to what would soon become Dragon's Watch. I find that kind of funny, since most people already felt the changing of the guard had happened. It made sense to show viscerally the previous generation leaving to make way for the next. And it's probably clear by now that we at ArenaNet, and me in particular, do not shy away from a tragic turn in the story. Air had just begun to mend fences with Bram, so losing her like we did when we did was a real kick in the gut for him and for us. So yeah, there is this follow-up post as well, where someone says, okay, let me be a little harsh here. Air's death was very good in terms of timing and impact. However, in terms of execution, it didn't feel appropriate for her character at all. This is a personal subjective opinion, of course, but I for sure know that it's shared with a lot of other players. Why wasn't Air's death more heroic, more stoic, more Norn? And I think that's kind of a reasonable point, actually. If you go back and look at exactly how that cutscene plays out, it's kind of pathetic and sad the way that Air goes, really. Matthew chimes in this time and says, I will say, even internally, there were some rather terse discussions about this moment and how we ultimately chose to represent it. In the end, by the way, I'll throw my hat in here. I actually really liked that they contrasted this whole heroic Norn stuff with Air just going out in the way she did. It was like really kind of nasty and gross. I enjoyed that myself. He says, in the end, the question really comes down to how much each person chooses to meet that final moment of their mortality. Do they fight and rage against it, or do they stand proudly, look it in the eye, and accept its inevitability with dignity? It was our opinion that, in that moment, Air should take the latter path. There's a lot more depth that we've explored through the years with the character that goes through thoughts and beliefs which inform a choice like that. But, at least for my money, I believe her death was heroic, and honoured her heritage as a Norn in the way she faced her end without fear, and with an affirmation that she had come to realise that her legend could be more than just battle. So, it's up to you guys to decide what you think about what these devs have said here with that story. Like I said, I wasn't ever too upset with the way that Air went out, the decision or any of it. If anything, I had more nitpicks to do with the actual cutscene itself and the quality of the cutscene, which kind of falls out of these people's purview anyway. But yeah, there you have it. Moving on, let's get into some perhaps more lore-bomby territory. We've got a question here. Morgemoth's weakness was his mind. Kraukatorix is his own crystalline blood. But what was Zaitan's weakness? The age-old question. Obviously a question because, let's face it, the Pokemon super effective idea that they're going with these days was not concepted with the Zaitan story, so there's no hide nor hair of it back there. To boil Zaitan's death down into one specific weakness would be a retroactive thing. So what does Andrew Gray respond with? He says, cannons. He says, hey, I used the correct form of the word this time, because obviously canon with one end, we're talking about canonicity, right? He says, I'm kidding, of course. I believe it was cutting him off from his food supply, the mouths of Zaitan, and basically blinding him, the eyes of Zaitan. Then, in his weakened state, cannons. I do believe a lot of people forget the campaign and or up to the final fight, but if I remember correctly, he's already been weakened by the time you fly up to him and shoot him off a building. So this is a good response. I like this response. It's good to remind the community that there was this huge war effort that went into the Zaitan arc. There's a lot of complaints about the final battle in terms of gameplay mechanics, but people sometimes think just because the gameplay was simplistic at the end, it means the entire story about his defeat was simplistic, and that would be wrong. If you actually look at what they did at core, there was a whole campaign, and it really felt like a big, broad, epic war effort, and that was great. That's actually one thing core did better than, say, I think Path of Fire or Heart of Thorns, which feel too small scale for these big, grand encounters and world building that they did. So there's that side of things, but then we do come back to the Pokemon-style super effective weakness thing. And I don't think we've really had a convincing argument for this. I like the idea that it was a big war campaign effort, but now we do have to face facts if we're going for everyone as a weakness. What was Zaitan's weakness? Airships, I think, is one of the hints that they sort of skirt and flirt with around Heart of Thorns, where they're like, oh, throwing a fleet of airships at Zaitan worked, but it didn't work for Morgemoth. I guess his weakness isn't airships. So I don't know really what convincing answer they can give here. I think it's the job of not the AFC to answer that fully, though. I think it's the job of putting that in game somewhere and really talking about it. If I was going to make a choice as a fan, I think the best thing they should do is double down on this idea of Gore's technology and sending his own poisoned magic back at him, having that megalit cannon fire magic that's tainted somehow, and that was his own demise. Kind of this interpretation that I saw someone else put similar on Reddit. The idea that it's Zaitan's own greed for magic and lust for magic that was his downfall. Whether that's a formal weakness in the way that they tried to make Morgemoth look like he had a formal weakness, I don't know. But there you have it. Next, we have a question about the transition of professions between the two games. Is it possible nowadays to learn the old professions? In Istam, we see dervishes and paragons. Yeah, that was with episode 1, guys. Some of them even use skills from Guild Wars 1. For example, Spear Marshal Zaim, who uses the Song of Power and the Anthem of Flame. Are those skills as effective as they were 250 years ago? And what about Livia? In the story, she's seen using a hex. In Guild Wars 2, she was a necromancer, and now she had the utility skill named Fragility. Is this the same spell as a Mesmer's Fragility in Guild Wars 1? If it is, could she change her profession or keep the second one? There is a place in Guild Wars 2 for hexes, because if I'm not wrong, Livia for us is the only example of a person who used a hex so far. I kind of hate this question. I've got nothing against the person who's asking it, but I think this is dangerous, stupid territory to go down, conflating game mechanics and lore, and we are well and truly in that territory when we start talking about the justification of hexes, which were a game mechanic, like an ephemeral, like, user interface-based thing, and then talking about them in lore. Not that they don't cross over at various points. I just think it's a mess, and I don't like going into this area of speculation. But we do it, though. Andrew Gray does have a response. He says, I can speak for the dervishes and the paragons since I made those skills creatures. Mechanically, all of their skills were as close to a one-to-one comparison to their Guild Wars 1 equivalents. There were some changes I had to make, like I had Rending Sweep remove boons instead of removing enchantments, but I made them as close to the originals as possible in the Guild Wars 2 combat system, and their behavior, movements, animations, etc. are supposed to be representative of the originals. Modern-day paragons and dervishes can hold their own against other combatants. Livia using a hex was a deliberate hint to show she is using what is basically ancient magic at this point. It was seeding the revelation of her identity for people familiar with the franchise. As for adding more playable professions, way above my pay grade. I was happy I was able to add them as an NPCs though. The next thread is one of my favorites from the entire AFC. So we have a question. Are there any plans to resolve all of the loose ends and unresolved plots introduced in Season 1? A few examples. Who's E? What was the purpose of the Crichton Royal Locket from Season 2? What about Malik? Great question. These things definitely are still on my mind, and it's kind of like when you're watching Pokemon, the original series, and they have that episode with the GS ball, and then it never comes back and it never means anything, and you realize later it's because they were going to do a movie about it, but then the movie got cancelled, and you're left there as a fan just feeling a bit crap. This is Guild Wars 2's version of that, and what I don't want to read in the AFC is a ton of behind-the-scenes justifications for why it's never coming back. I want to hear, like, resolutions, or that resolutions will come. So let's see what the devs say. It's Bobby fielding the answer with a brilliant wall of text. He says this is a good question and a rather complex topic. Let's start off by acknowledging where we're at. The personal story and Season 1 introduced a lot of characters, concepts, story threads, some of which were never resolved. Much of that was due to scope, as the personal story and Living World Season 1 were, frankly, unfocused in spots. That led to some story debt. Because we're not at liberty to discuss unreleased content, we can't simply go through a list of bullet points and write yes, no, maybe next to each item people would like answers on. But we can talk a bit about how we develop story to give you some insight into the process, and also acknowledge that, yes, we're aware of what's currently unresolved, and yes, we would like to resolve some of them. Let's ignore that word. Let's pretend that word some isn't in this response, guys. Oh, what a great response. We're getting answers. All right. Okay. So he says, here's a simplified view of how we develop a season story. First, we take inventory on where we're at. By the way, what I think he's about to say, I sincerely doubt is what they did for Season 1. But okay, where are we in the overarching Dragon story? Where are the characters in their arcs? What unresolved character journeys or plots exist, and how do they relate to the main story we're telling? Every single time we discuss story for an expansion or a Living World season, we talk about these loose ends. We weigh those potential stories along with the main dragon and character ones we're committed to finishing. If we have the time and resources to work one or more of them into the season plan, we do so. If we can't do them justice, we leave them be with the intention of reevaluating the possibility later. Here's why. We already know from our experience in developing the personal story in Season 1 that quantity doesn't equal quality. Oh my god, I can hug this man. We need to focus on our characters and commit to telling a satisfying story from start to finish rather than try to tackle everything and doing a mediocre job of it. I remind you guys that a lot of stuff in core never made it even if they did go for quantity, and a lot of it still didn't make it, like the Scepter of All back then and whatnot, right? That means we're making the tough decision of not resolving some of these stories as quickly as folks would like. In some cases, we might not ever touch them again, but we're acutely aware of the story debt we've created and frequently discuss how best to tie things up. Personally, I'd like to see us tie up some loose ends this season or in the future, as do many of us on the narrative and design teams. We just need to figure out the right way to do it and then commit to doing it right. So a great response really gives you an idea that they're on the ball and they understand what, as Bobby describes as story debt. There's another side to this story as well that I'm sure he could have gone and elaborated on, and that's the way that story debt, like, starts to evaporate in many players' minds as time goes forward, but solidifies in others. And so you have this weird situation of, okay, let's take a really early mystery, like what happened to Mai Trin? She went to the mist, right? That's like a season 1 thing that people can't even play anymore. A lot of people watching this video even won't really be familiar with the specifics of that. And so if the devs then in season 5 drop a bombshell where Mai Trin returns, that payoff will only solidify in some people's minds. So then you have to kind of do this preamble thing where you've got to remind people of Mai Trin's existence, which has its own challenges of, like, it can tip people off early that a reveal might be coming and you might not want to do that. And now you're going to be wondering, if you have to do a preamble to give a reveal, is it really important to do the reveal in the first place? All of that stuff will be rolling around there. I just like having that bit of confidence that they're aware of what their important mysteries are. It's a shame we don't get a list, where we get to see Ivinia written down on the page and Baltec written down on the page and whatnot, even going way back to Guild Wars 1 nonsense. There was a question on this AFC about a random ghost outside the Ashford Abbey in Guild Wars 1 pre-searing that someone wanted an answer to. I'm pretty sure the devs won't have that on their list, but the fact they have a concept of a list definitely means something. Also, everything they say there about quantity versus quality, I think that's great. Again, I'll be curious about any kind of wall of text comments people might want to leave in response to this one down below. Moving to another thread, I'm not going to read the full question that someone's put here, but we're talking about Revenants and how they can commune with people and do they have to be dead and whatnot, because obviously in Season 1 you had that very minor moment where if you played a Rev you could commune with Joko to get out of the cell, and was this a hint that Joko's not around anymore? And it's all very complicated to think about, to tell you the truth. And so Scott just says, and I really like the clarity on this, nice hard and fast answer, Revenant Legends, the entities Revenant summons to access their skills, don't have to be dead to be summoned. There you go, case closed. They aren't ghosts or spirits of those entities, they are echoes of that persona that exists in the mist, snapshots, if you will, of all the entities who are routinely high profile, powerful personalities that had major impact on the world. Don't forget that the time stretches through space and time, right, guys? So this has always been a possibility. He says, similar to how fractals physically and magically recreate historical events, it's not time travel, and you're not literally reliving the historic events, i.e. you can't change the outcome, you can't prevent the searing, for example, no matter how many times you beat the urban battleground fractal, but instead you experience a copy of it that's more or less identical to the original. The mist spread through space and time, you can get copies from anywhere, and I really like that clarity. Again, I'd like that in game somewhere. If Heart of Thorns had those kind of elite specialization NPCs and also equivalent ones for the Revenant profession, that would be so good, right? This is where they could explain some of that stuff. And that has ramifications in other places, by the way, guys. Like, for a long time, people were saying, quite decidedly, hey, Jarlis must be dead. But that's not true. Jarlis could still be king of the dwarves, leading them in the depths of Tyria, and I like that, because I want to see Jarlis again. I think that'd be fun. And at least for Season 4's purposes, this clears away a little more of the muddiness that was introduced by that little conspiracy from Episode 1. Another wall of text here. Look at how verbose they're being, guys. It's fantastic. This is like more than you get on the AMAs. You can tell they're really, really putting it in on this one. So, my question is, how could the Forgotten have known 250 years in the past, when Gleam/Vlast was born, and before even Aurene was born, that 2 Elder Dragons would be slain in a short amount of time? This relates to Path of Fire and, yeah, the fact that everything seems to revolve around that. So Scott chimes in and says, I believe there's a misunderstanding here, caused by the speaker shifting from what the situation was to what it became and then back again. The Forgotten did not know ahead of time that 2 Elder Dragons would be removed from the system, but that's what happened. So the Exalted applied the Forgotten's original plan to the new situation as best they could. This is not the first time I've seen this question. I've seen speculation that it's because of Glenn's prophetic qualities that they knew stuff like this. But Scott lays it down here. He says, the line that begins, the Forgotten set out to break this cycle, refers to the plan that they launched with Glint to create Glint's legacy and solve the problem of the Elder Dragon's destructive cycle, a plan that included her scions. The Elder Dragons are predatory and do the feast-famine thing. Glint's legacy was intended to fix that, among other things, by sweeping in scions who were more like Glint, benevolent, connected to mortals, who would share magic rather than hoard it, than they were like Zaitan, Kraukatoric, etc. The unexpected wrinkle was that the Forgotten didn't count on having to replace 2 Elder Dragons at once, as reflected in the next line, but when 2 Elder Dragons, ... And he elaborates that the unexpected development created a void that needs to be filled urgently, ahead of and different from the originally planned Scion rollouts, or there would be a disastrous collapse. Then he goes back to the original plan. The hope was that Glint's legacy would stabilize the world. We theorized ... Which was and still is the plan, but now the timetable's been sped up due to 2 missing Elder Dragons. The original plan was to swap the Scions in a more controlled manner, and only when they were ready to be swapped in. Now we have to rush and fill in the vacancies. Only then will the balance of magic become truly stable, before the situation becomes a global magical collapse. TLDR, there wasn't supposed to be 2 vacancies at all, at least not until the Scions were 100% ready to step up and become replacements. The vacancies were a surprise, and they pose new and urgent danger, but the original intent of replacing Elder Dragons with more benevolent Scions hasn't changed. The Forgotten were gone, and so the Exalted reacted to the changing situation, and in this scene are describing that shift and beseeching the Commander to take up their cause and see it through. I see how it could have been written more clearly, but the intent of these lines was not that the Forgotten knew 2 vacancies were coming. It's that the Forgotten planned to replace sitting Elder Dragons, not fill vacancies. And now the speaker is hoping the original plan can still work, given the situation is different now. So that's very clear to me. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. The one thing I'm left wondering now as well is, if you look at Edge of Destiny and the battle against Kraukatoric, it wasn't just Scions they were going to replace, right? Like, Glint actually wanted to start off immediately by replacing Kraukatoric with herself right then and there, right? But that went wrong too, so you just see all these catastrophes back to back to back. And the first one, the one triggered by Edge of Destiny, the loss of Glint herself, that's kind of terrible. This next thread is on incredible subject material, but don't expect a real response. Question from Sirin: do you see the story of Guild Wars expanding or transitioning to a Guild Wars 3 in the future? I know a lot of people are thinking about this, right? And even I was thinking about it with Bobby's response earlier in this video, where he was talking about quality over quantity. You know, the impression you get from Bobby's reply is that they still have a ton of time to work with. You get no impression or sense that they're trying to rush through story to get to a 3rd game. That, you know, they've got plenty of time and an abundance of seasons and expansions on their mind. You can kind of just tell implicitly from a comment like that. But we're always thinking about this, right? What is the overall story of Guild Wars 2? Where does it end? What is the transition to Guild Wars 3? So, speaking hypothetically, of course, and without details and spoilers, does the writing team ever play around with the idea of a Guild Wars 3 or a story that expands beyond Guild Wars 2? Obviously fun territory to ponder. Jessica Price comes in and says, well, when I inadvisedly came to work after taking my migraine meds and I was kind of loopy, I did say the sequel to Guild Wars 2 should be a spaceship shows up. A bunch of humans in extremely fetching spacesuits disembark and address the gawking crowd, saying, "We think a bunch of gods from our planet came here. Have you seen them by any chance?" The Tyrian humans are rather taken aback. The space humans look around and are like, "Yep, chaos everywhere, they've clearly been here. Man, once those jerks left our planet, we figured out how to end war, poverty, hunger, disease, all that stuff. But then we started worrying that when they left our planet, they went to someone else's." A Tyrian human, still struggling to work through her astonishment and confusion, blurts, "Well, they were here, but they left." The space humans sigh in annoyance. "Okay, fine. Get in. Let's go find those wretches before they wreck anyone else's world." And then you go on a magical space adventure together. Okay, but for some reason we're not making that game, she says. So there you go, that's Guild Wars 3. Expect that in 2025. Next question here, titled Elder Dragon, Zaitan, and Morgemoth. Good morning, devs. My questions are in regard to Zaitan's power and Morgemoth's abilities. The topic's come up several times on the lore forum as well as the wiki. Can the Elder Dragons corrupt corpses like Zaitan can, or is that strictly an ability only available to death magic and those dragons who have control of it? 2, are the blighting plods that Morgemoth created in Heart of Thorns because of the fact Morgemoth consumed the death magic spectrum, or is the ability to use corpses in the manufacturing of minions a natural one? And lastly, the most interesting question to me, what is Zaitan's shadow magic spectrum? Because remember, we hear that he's, you know, there are 2 parts, and we hear shadow was a part of Zaitan, right? But how have we actually seen that be embodied within the game and through what Zaitan did? So we get a response from Andrew Gray, who says, number 1, after Zaitan's death, the other Elder Dragons gained the ability to make minions out of the dead. Prior to that, the only living hosts were viable for other Elder Dragons. That's a really specific thing. So you've got to contextualize that within the way that the Ice Brood were created by Jormag. Okay, you've got to think about the way that the brand created creatures. That is what they are saying right here definitively. Then they say the ability for corpses to be viable candidates is the ability Morgemoth gained from Zaitan. Without Zaitan's power, only the living could be placed in blighting pods, making taking people alive the only way to create clones. I believe living hosts still create stronger clones, however, hence the drive to still capture victims alive when possible. And lastly, most disappointingly, he doesn't even respond to the last question there. He says, I'm not sure what you mean by this, could you clarify? But there you have it. I do find myself very curious about Jormag at the moment, and I'll probably have to go re-review some of the literature and what they've written about that. But yeah, that's what they're saying. Next, many of the characters, including the commander, have developed well, but for some of the characters, such as Bram and Kaz, their arcs seem to meander or have lost focus. I'm interested to know which character in particular you feel has the strongest arc so far, and which ones you'd like to explore further at some point. So this is a pretty fluffy question. I'm not even sure I agree with the premise of. But it resulted in some very cool answers about what's upcoming. So check it out. Lindsay says, I was actually talking to one of the designers on episode 5 yesterday about how I really like how we've handled Bram this season. You guys have only seen the first 2 episodes, but I'm quite proud of the work we've done with him over the whole season. While season planning, we really approached his character in particular with a seriousness and exploration to figure out exactly what the right thing for him to do was. I like that they did that because they probably saw the big community response to that moment in season 3. The high-level season arc changed dramatically multiple times during planning, which afforded us the opportunity to play around with a lot of potential arcs for him. It'll be really fun to let you guys know what they all were, but that will have to wait until the season concludes, as I'd hate to give spoilers. So pretty exciting. I hope that they can win the community in general around on the Bram topic for sure. I've really enjoyed what they did so far. Episode 2 having that moment where we don't actually verbalize very much was cool. Another excellent response in the same thread from Scott, who says, in my opinion, it's Kanak. And let me just say, guys, he's totally right. He says, writing 101 teaches us that good characters have a past. That is, somewhere they've been, or are currently, that sets up a new place for them to go as they change and mature. Kanak started out as a mercenary, who crossed the line into criminality. He got caught, jailed, worked off his debt to society, and is now taking pains to not go wind up behind bars again. He also had some really nice character moments with the commander in Heart of Thorns, especially if you were Sylvari, when he's dealing with the influence of Morgemoth in his head. So his character arc has a clear progression, and in my opinion, it's been fun to see each step of his evolution: antagonist, criminal, convict, Shining Blade agent, freelance mercenary. Especially since he hasn't lost the core personality traits or become a saint. He's still a bit selfish, very snarky, and someone you can absolutely rely on in a pinch. Plus, his interactions with Ritlock are priceless. Brothers in arms who give each other a hard time like actual brothers do, at least the way me and my brother do. Yeah, I really agree with him here. Kanak's awesome. I'll remind you guys about the website blog post story we had, where he's intimidating sub-director Null by literally rolling a decapitated head across this Asura's floor to coerce information out of him, basically threatening to chop this dude's head off. It's amazing. He's so sinister and scary. I actually want more of those darker flashes to come back with Kanak. I don't want them to revert him and, you know, have him have some big great fall, but I'd like more sincere, like those very dark reminders of that he's still the same guy. But in general, he's obviously, to me, had the best arc overall, the most change and the most believable change too. Either it's that, or I'm talking out of my arse and it's just because I'm a fan of John DiMaggio. A short response, but a big lore bomb here. Gods and Elder Dragons. So, I want to first note that I do not believe this theory or anything to do with it. And you would think with the new expansion it would die, but somehow it just keeps coming back. It would be nice to finally have a developer put their opinions down in print. Are the gods and the Elder Dragons related? Either as being two sides of the same being, or just being tied together at all? Thoughts? A response from Jessica Price, who very bluntly says, Elder Dragons are native to Tyria, and the human gods are from elsewhere. So as far as them being related, no. Guys, this is actually huge. This is like one of those moments where you should rewind and think about all the discussion, like looking at Omad's machine and the orbs flying around and stuff in Season 1. This whole concept of elder dragons and their relation to the gods has been a huge part of the high-level world-building speculation that the community is engaged in for years and years and years. It's not a bad thing, by the way. As you all know, I've always enjoyed that they flirt with this idea and that the community has constantly tried to wrestle things together. I've always been very blunt that it basically doesn't work. The more you try to say, Melanju is clearly the same as Morgemorth because they're both planty or whatever, the more you try to tie the gods to the orbs, to the dragons, the more you realize it doesn't fit and there's these paradoxes and it just doesn't hammer together right. But I've always enjoyed that and celebrated that and loved that side of speculation of this community. And now here we are in 2018. That to me is putting the nail in the coffin there, really. It's basically saying, yeah, they're different. Actually, we just look at these entities may feel similar in that powerful entities that host a lot of magic in this universe end up feeling similar somehow. But elder dragons are native, gods are not. And that's kind of an amazing thing to boil it down to. I'd love to see the narrative play with in the future, because you would think that our perspective as players of Guild Wars and, you know, loving Tyria, you'd think we'd side with the things that are native, not the alien gods, right? And yet somehow the gods have felt more like protagonists than anything else compared to the Elder Dragons so far. And that's really fun. I like that a lot. But there you have it. Big answer. Continuing with the big responses, let's talk about Malik. This was one of the first ones to catch a lot of traction on the AFC. Denari says, this has been touched on before, but I would like to delve a little deeper into this one loose end. It's pretty clear that the story has moved on, and given your approach to story presentation, i.e. focusing on the major beats, keeping things lean and streamlined, it seems unlikely we'll get to revisit this. So, are you able to tell us anything about what ended up on the cutting room floor? So I think Denari phrased this perfectly, seems to exactly understand the situation. Malik was a casualty of scoping issues, and when's their opportunity to come back to it? Are we ever going to get it? I think I'm fully aligned with this question. I'd love to hear what came from the cutting room floor. And well, Lindsay Murdoch blows our minds by saying Matthew Medina wrote an unpublished short story that delves into this stuff in depth. I really love the treatment he did on it, and I would love to see it become canon one day. To that end, I'm not going to say anything about it. Let's both cross our fingers together that it will happen someday. So, those who have followed the whole Malik thing for a long time, you'll know that Matthew, whenever Malik comes up, Matthew tends to be the guy that's got good insights and talks about, you know, exactly what happened there. But yeah, he's got a short story. They're like a double-edged sword, really. I love the idea that we could get that lore via a short story, if anywhere. That's great. The other hand, we saw through Season 1 just how ineffectual short stories published outside the game actually are, and it's really horrible when you get big, important stuff that only exists in short story form, like all the backstory for Scarlet, for example, being reliant on that to appreciate Season 1, and it wasn't even in-game. You know, so it's a double-edged sword, and even specifically, Lindsay comes back as well and says, I'm not talking about publishing the short story, I mean building it as actual content. True canon is what lives in the game, she says, which I think is great. There was another post I won't explicitly refer to here, but on the AFC, where they're talking about the actual date that the Sylvari awakened. You know, is it a specific year, or is it 25 years before the launch of the game and whatnot? And they say, listen, if there's anything contradictory in the books, true canon is in the game, all right? But yeah, we hear that again. So the idea that we'd get an actual content, not just a short story, it's great. That's not all, though. Matthew does chime in, and he says basically the best thing we could hope for, which is it's definitely something I'm still thinking about. At this point, it's mostly a question of finding the time to build it in the game. So the story exists, they just got to figure out how to build it in the game. It's currently just a PowerPoint plus a pitch document. With my proposal, it's much more involved than a fractal, so I need to do a deeper design document first and foremost. Smiley face, do the document, Matthew, come on, we want to see this so badly. How cool is that? There was another comment lower down where someone said, is it going to be like a current event? And he said, yeah, it could be, or it could be like something else. This is exciting. Something higher quality than a fractal that touches on Malik? Oh, I know. I mean, who's not actually excited by that? There's so many Sylvari fans out there too. Let's see the other tree. Let's do it. Not the most amazing thread here, but still kind of interesting. Human clergy structure and aftermath. 2 questions in one. Has human society any kind of clergy structure related to the Church of the Six? I mean, like an ecclesiastical hierarchy similar to known religions. Only priests, priestesses are found in the game, but some NPCs like Abbot Matthias or a highly religious reference titles of some white mantle NPCs make me think in some kind of clergy structure. How is this Clergy of the Six has reacted to Balthazar's defeat? Have non-Zation followers still power in this clergy? I actually love this. This is an amazing question because I haven't ever really considered how they would be structured in terms of religion. They've been so hands-off about that with this franchise. I love that thought. I love the thought that you've got the 3 orders, but then also like the religious order amongst the humans and whatnot. That's great, and it looks like the devs have thought about it too, because Jessica Price says stay tuned for a small glimpse into this. So maybe only a small glimpse, but I'm interested in a glimpse for sure. I'm guessing it will more deal with the whole Balthazar side of things. But that's important too, and now that I stop and I seriously think about that, I think there should be more weight and impact behind the death of a freaking god at the end of the expansion, and maybe Season 4 so far has been remiss not to do enough on that. Next, the legendary Rain Pumpkin here, good to see his name, says, during Season 3, we got hint/confirmation that Logan was going to replace Marshal Traherne as leader of the Pact. Is this confirmed? What has the Pact been doing while we're in the desert? We didn't see any Pact forces help to defend from the Awakened forces. Neither did we see any Vigil. Does Tyrion know about the whole warning, do not kill any Elder Dragons thing? That's a great question at the end there as well, because I thought that the expansion, and maybe even this season, was going to have a big boiling scene where we have to sit down in front of Almora, Soulkeeper or something, and say, hey, yeah, we're going to have to ask you not to kill Elder Dragons anymore, and see them like freak out to that. That's a big conversation. That could be a powerful moment. But we've seen hide nor hair of it. Jessica Price, again, says stay tuned for, I think, answers to all of these questions. That's very exciting to me. So many of her posts here have just been like, yeah, we're doing that, don't worry. And they're so exciting. The other guy's writing these huge wall of text and she's titillating us with these single sentences, letting us know that things are coming. Great. All right, my favorite thread. Wait, did I already claim I had my favorite thread? If I haven't already claimed it, it's this one. This is brilliant. The Utopia question. I know we mentioned at the start of the video. We're finally here, guys. Guild Wars Utopia. The cancelled Guild Wars 1 campaign, Utopia, was supposedly set to feature an Aztec-themed landmass. Where was the campaign supposed to be set on the world map in relation to Central Tyria? And is there a chance we will see these areas at some point in a future expansion? Very, very excited. So we get an answer from Lindsay here, the old guard. So here she says, disclaimer that nothing developed for Utopia is actually considered canon lore since it never shipped. And obviously we all understand that, right, guys? It's the idea is that they can reuse it and it might guide some of the future developments, right? But so she says this, it wasn't set on Tyria. She could have just left that full stop there and this post would have been complete already. It wasn't even set on Tyria. So there were speculations that it wasn't. You know Baltec in Nightfall? There were a lot of theories that Baltec, this time-traveling interdimensional mist traveler guy, was a hint to Utopia, and therefore, if he had this affiliation with the mist, maybe the expansion would be there too. It definitely seems that. There was also the ideas of the island to the north of Istan floating in and out of reality, hints at Utopia. Again, it seems like that might have been to do with that. Remember that we had the Staff of the Mists introduced, the twin to the Scepter of Ore, and that could have also been Utopia related. We knew that they were doing this in factions, hinting at Nightfall stuff, so Nightfall stuff would have been hinting at Utopian stuff. And so these theories were established before, and look, it's come to fruition there. For the first time in over a decade since we first heard about Utopia, it's true. Apparently, it wasn't even going to be on Tyria. It was a mist-based expansion. All those little threads we were scrambling at before, we were onto something. That's great, but she goes on. She explains that it was set in a place in the mists, which was framed as somewhat of a home or playground of the gods. Imagine that, with the home of all the gods, the original. You know, people speculate that that's like real-world Earth these days. Where the gods came from, guys. Not necessarily the realms that they now hold dominion over, like the underworld, but where was Doom from, for example? Where was Dwayne from? Here, Utopia. It featured an expanded pantheon of the gods, including Dwayne's father. And don't forget, other areas of Guild Wars 1 lore suggested at family trees, like Menzies Mengus being the half-brother of Balthazar and so on. So we get the expanded Pantheon. Already, can you imagine the territory this might have gone in? Obviously, I think by actually showing it in game, it would have lost a lot of its mysticism and excitement behind it when they actually had represented it. If this campaign had come out, but still, they go on though. It also featured characters from all around the timeline. Gwen and Devonna's father were main characters. So Devonna's father did appear in one of the first ever short stories written about Tyria and Guild Wars, where you can learn a bit about them at the Battle of Kylo, I think it was. So yeah, seeing them come back, that's a great idea. Gwen, so remember how Gwen became a big feature of Eye of the North? It looks like they were settled on bringing Gwen back even before Eye of the North was Eye of the North. Back when it was Utopia, they'd already decided, yeah, we want Gwen to be a thing. That probably would have been child Gwen. She probably would have grown up anyway. But yeah, so we would have seen an older Gwen out in the mists. Wow, so you get like the time travel stuff, you get the God Playground stuff. I saw a thread on the Guild Wars 1 subreddit of people saying, wow, wouldn't this have been amazing? And it really would have been. I can already imagine the kind of fan stories that people could write about this. And then lastly, unfortunately, the comment ends a bit limply. She says, you did see those areas, by the way. We repurposed those assets to use as the Asuran architectural aesthetic and use those concepts to build out the regional coastal region of Eye of the North. The Asura were originally more of a cave dweller species. You can actually see their original aesthetic in the Boreal Station outpost of Guild Wars 1, which, yeah, had like that very specific design. We already knew that last bit, though. Come on. We know that the Destroyers were originally Tanex and they were the antagonists for Utopia and whatnot. So, yeah, the last bit, unfortunately, we don't get more lore bombs. That's crazy. That is honestly such a cool post. And, you know, for the first time, I guess people will have updated the Guild Wars 1 wiki now to refer to this, and we get a little bit more insight into where they were potentially going with it. Something else excites me about this, by the way, too, and that's that the devs seem to have more balls to just openly discuss old Guild Wars 1 stuff now. And, you know, as time goes by, they should be more and more at liberty to do that and give us these kinds of anecdotes and weird things. Because, like, what harm does it do? It doesn't mean anything really anymore as more time passes, increasingly so. So I'm looking forward to seeing more fun stories about this, you know, this decade-old game now. 3 or 4 more images to go through here, guys. This thread about Casimir, again, kind of on the lines of the whole dropped Living World early Living World stuff. This was Season 2. Casimir's gift. Through the story, Lady Casimir has had this mysterious gift of detecting or sensing when someone is lying. She's a very gifted mesmer, so it's only natural she has a knack for understanding the human mind and illusions, whether magical or verbal. But while watching her speak to one of her gods, it seriously looked like Cormyr had paid special attention to Casimir before. Maybe even so much Casimir is actually blessed by the goddess of truth with this particular gift. It is after all implied Cormyr had blessed others too with unusual gifts in the past. Is this the case, or can we expect something else further in the story? So up until this post, I hadn't really been aware of this theory. I never certainly had the feeling that the goddess paid more attention to Casimir, or if she did, it's just because she was human and it was in the midst of a Path of Fire story about her faith being broken. But yeah, so Scott does respond here and say, Cass's gift, being a walking lie detector, was originally conceived as being due more to her mind than magic. Being a gifted mesmer, an expert at creating illusions, and would likewise be great at spotting other folks' years of experience in high society, and as a de facto diplomat for the Queen, where you have to often conceal your true intentions for formality's sake, and also determine what others are concealing, and a natural talent for reading/spotting their tells. Kaz would be a formidable poker player, came together such that Kaz's brain is an asset much the same as Timy's is for tech and Canax's for tactics, one that provides info input the team can use. So Cormyr's interest and rapport with Kaz didn't create this gift. Its origins aren't really rooted in the God's blessing. So there's two sides to this. Number one, I didn't really care about the idea that Cormyr had given Cass that gift or whatever, but I kind of don't like Scott's response in the Season 2. If you replay Season 2, they were clearly hinting that that was like a thing. It like came up multiple episodes back to back. It seemed to be building to something. And now it feels like they're just playing it off as if it's like, oh, that's just a part of her character. We were never going anywhere with that. There was never any significance behind it, and certainly not in Path of Fire. So I don't know how I really feel about that one. I guess when no story is planned for her detecting lies. What do you guys think? Because it's not fresh on our minds, maybe that's acceptable now. Getting into some Norn lore. Hell yeah, I'm up for this. Rain Pumpkin says, can the spirits of the wild hear us, Norn, in far places like the heart of the Maguma? What about in the desert? The most far acts done by them we know is from the Orr personal story step, where we discover the map that was given to the Norn crew that was hit by the rise of Orr and Zaitan. Scott responds by saying, the spirits of the wild can absolutely hear Norn who call upon them, regardless of where those Norn are when they call. Keep in mind that the spirits of the wild are not like gods who answer prayers or directly respond to their followers. None call upon their patron spirit to invoke the spirit's power. For example, wisdom from Raven, stealth from Snow Leopard, and inspire themselves to achieve great things. But one-on-one interactions between the spirit and individual Norn are very rare. For example, a wolf shaman might preach about what wolf teaches about cooperation and collective effort, and a Norn in the middle of the desert might evoke wolf to make sure everyone present works together effectively to reach their final destination, but their expectation is that it's less of a transactional thing. I prayed for deliverance and so wolf delivered us. And more of an inspirational thing. I called upon wolf to guide and inspire us so that we can fix this ourselves, and he did, so we could. I think that offers some nice clarity that I hope the core game offers. The thread does go on and people start discussing that more visual moment we've heard about where the Norn were led south, right? And we had the death of Al 2. Scott says, absolutely, we haven't dramatized that moment in game, so it's still not canonically defined, but I've always interpreted the tales as one of the rare cases of the spirits of the wild manifesting visibly to lead those who invoked them. Very extreme circumstances, death of Al, potential deaths of all these Norn, called for very unusual actions. So that spurs the spirits of the wild to do something kind of extreme. That sounds like a great story beat that could come up in some kind of Norn-themed expansion too. Kind of similar to when the gods appeared to us at the Gate of Madness in GW1. You could have like a Norn equivalent version. Is that tacky? That's probably boring and tacky, right? Anyway, another comment reads that I was recently reading about the spirits of the wild, being a big fan of Norn on snow maps, and I found that currently we have no clue who is, if there even is, the Havroon of Bear. The last Havroon of Bear died in Ore during the personal story and risen and was killed by us, Havroon Gretchen. Did she leave another person in her place when she went to Ore? Is there no current known Havroon of Bear? And so Scott says, it's true, Gretchen died and there was no obvious replacement standing in to take up the mantle. It's also true that Havroons routinely have an apprentice they've been training to take their place while they're also actively Havrooning. So it's possible Gretchen left behind a partially trained apprentice who now either needs to complete their training on their own or find another mentor to help them finish their journey. It's likewise possible that the Bear Havroon slot is vacant and there's no one even partially trained standing in to take the job. I don't like his open speculation at the last thing. You'd think that would be quite sincere, right? Either way, I think that would make for an interesting story to pursue, with the caveat that I literally have no idea if such plans are in the work. It's just an idea that appeals to me. I think that last comment there as well betrays, perhaps, guys, the fear that there is not a Norn expansion in the works. Moving on to the penultimate post, human languages. I know that Matthew Medina threw us a bone not so long ago. That was a post on the forums where he was talking a lot about language and the development of them. But I was curious, and like the various races, like the Char language, the Norn, so on. But I was curious if there was more to share regarding the human culture specifically. We know back in Guild Wars 1, they had at least 3 spoken languages. So we're not talking about like New Crichton and Old Crichton. We're talking about spoken languages. They had Elonian, Old Canthan, and Old Kurzik were all shown, along with 3 more written ones. There was the Ascalonian script, the Old Crichton script, and Orion. Did Ascalon and Kryta once have matching spoken tongues? What about Ore? The place names there seem thematically close to what we see in the desert in Guild Wars 2. So does that mean that the Orion and Elonian shared a common root? Did all the human languages differentiate from one root, or did the original population transplanted by the gods contain multiple linguistic bubbles? What a cool question. I actually studied linguistics, so this is right up my alley. I don't know whether we're going too deep down the rabbit hole in the pursuit of making Tyria feel realistic by fleshing these kind of details out, but I love the thread. Jessica Price comes in and says, oh, you've hit on something I'd really like us to flesh out, but at this point we haven't done much work on languages, and specifically spoken languages they haven't done much on. Cantha, I think, did it best, but Cantha had amazing backstory and world building in so many ways like that. The problem is doing it right involves a ton of work. It's essentially a history in and of itself. It involves a survey of our character names, place names, and other terminology, and reverse engineering reasons for why they're inconsistent. And by the way, they are inconsistent a lot. Doing it wrong can end up painting you into a lot of corners. I'm trying to codify the phonology for names in various regions so we can get more consistency in a sense of what an Alolan name sounds like versus a Crichton one, but a linguistic history of Tyria is probably not in the cards for the immediate future. And lastly, a fairly well-rounded thread to finish up here, guys. 58 minutes in. Sirin is basically asking for an encapsulation of what the story of Guild Wars 2 is, or just Guild Wars is. Is it about Elder Dragons and how their existence seeps into the world, either positively or negatively, affecting all life forms, or is it about the various standout characters and their large ambitions? We have seen more recently the devs seem to focus a lot more on character-driven stories rather than the large set pieces. But so Andrew Gray gives an interesting response and says, this is just my take. But I feel like the races of Tyria struggling to understand and maintain the balance of magic and knowing their place within that balance is a theme that is touched on heavily throughout both Guild Wars and Guild Wars 2. A lot of the backstory from before Guild Wars deals with the consequences of mortal races acquiring magic, a la King Doric and Abaddon. There's also a large number of people, good and bad, who bit off more than they could chew with magic beyond what they could control, and the ramifications of those actions is often what the PC is striving to correct in both games. The revelation of the Elder Dragon cycle was, or should have been, a humbling moment for races that up to that point acted like they alone owned magic, but instead the initial reaction was the same as it had always been, an attempt to control it through force. It's something that has kicked the can down the road a number of times before, but eventually, you run out of road. I think that's a really nice interpretation. I would be curious if anyone has an alternate one, because yeah, just that interplay between who has magic and why and what they do with it, I think that's Guild Wars. So there you go, guys. That is the AFC, the Forum AFC. A bit of news at the start as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you took the time to check it out and let me know what you think to any of these dev comments down in the comments below. I'm very curious about what the next topic for the AFC will be, and I promise you, if it's juicy, I will give you full coverage of that as well. Keep an eye out for the other projects on the channel. I will remind you, I got the Let's Play going on, have a big PvP tournament going on Saturday on the stream. Please do check that out. A link in the description for that too, and I will be back very shortly. Catch you next time, guys.